Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay, got my first video out of the way. By my second video of the day, I feel like I'm ready to go. So, doing another recommended video today, or now. How you guys doing, by the way? You good? Hope you're doing well. If not, you'll be good soon, don't worry. Wrong pipe. All right. Marian reforms and their military effects. Kings and Generals. Great channel. I'm going to give it a preemptive like just because Kings and Generals. Okay. If you're new to the channel, hello. My name is Connor. I like to learn about history, the YouTube recommendations, the original link to the video, top of the description below, right below that, link to the Discord. Just click on it. It'll send you right over there. Look, my chair sometimes does this. Just goes down. I need a new chair. Oh yeah, love to have you. Just click on it. Send you right over there. Join the family. More the merrier. Pull up a chair, my friend. People over there are nice, usually. Okay. Let's go. If you are not ready to learn, there's the door. You know the drill. Or you should. If you don't, then you're learning it now. There's the door. Home ec is down the hall. You're in the wrong class. Make me mozzarella sticks. Yes. And potato skins. Let's go.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Learn more about Skillshare and the exclusive offer they have for our viewers at the end of the video.
Okay.
In the late 2nd century BC, Rome had defeated and subjugated Greece and Macedonia, wiped Carthage from existence, and had delivered the Seleucid Empire a devastating blow. Its fortunes seemed to be ever increasing, but
Sorry, it said late 2nd century.
Our viewers
BC?
at the end of the video. In the late 2nd century BC.
So that's the 100s BC. So the late 2nd century BC, would that be like the low 100s BC? Okay.
Rome had defeated and subjugated Greece and Macedonia, wiped Carthage from existence, and had delivered the Seleucid Empire a devastating blow. Its fortunes seemed to be ever increasing, but problems were growing slowly. The stress of ever-increasing warfare and wealth division in their society was threatening to tear the Republic apart. On top of this, the militia army of the earlier Republic was stagnating and becoming inadequate for facing new enemies due to a lack of manpower. Soon a threat from the north would emerge that would necessitate the complete overhaul of the Roman military into what was essentially the first Roman imperial army. Welcome to our video on the Marian reforms of the late Republic. In 113 BC, a roaming army of Germanic warriors crossed Rome's border on the Danube, driven by unlivable climate conditions in their homeland. For the next few years, they rampaged around Roman territory and defeated a few Roman armies. In 105 BC, they crushed an army of 80,000 legionaries at Arausio, after which the situation became critical. The Roman people were terrified and expected the Germanic hordes at the gates of Rome at any time. It seemed as though the Republic might fall until one man returned to take command, Gaius Marius. He had just finished the Jugurthine War against the Numidians and was elected consul in absentia during the year 105 BC. Upon his return to Rome, he began to drastically alter the military in order to combat this new threat. His reforms would have a wide-ranging impact, both on the legions and the state of Rome. It is worth noting that not all of his changes were novel. Generals before Marius had paved the way for them, and had partaken in various different tactics before this time, such as the reduction of the baggage train. Marius, however, both created new methods for the Roman army and permanently instituted the effective methods of the other commanders who had come before him. Until Marius's reforms, there was a property requirement to join the citizen militia legions. This limited the number of legionaries, as they had to supply their own arms and armor and had to own property valued at 3,500 sesterces or more. Perhaps the most important reform implemented by Marius was to ignore this property requirement. He allowed the Capitae Censi of Rome to join the legions, those counted by the head.
How do you
The
supply them?
landless poor were now among the ranks of those who could join the legions, even though they had no property. On top of, and because of this, Marius arranged for the state to supply the legions with their arms and armor, offered poor recruits the chance to gain a professional soldier's pay, and the chance to gain loot and plunder on campaign. The masses, with little hope of gaining status in any other occupation, flocked to Marius's new legions. In contrast to the earlier Roman policy in which the citizen army would disband after a campaign, recruits were now enlisted for a term of 16 years. This created a standing Roman army for the first time, and drastically increased its quality.
Sorry, just imagine like a son of yours goes off, and then he comes back like 8 years later, this hardened Roman soldier with all this plundering and fancy armor and stuff like that. Sorry.
On the other hand, the balanced cross-sectional army of the Roman people at war was destroyed, in favor of an army made up mainly of the landless poor, the proletarii. This would eventually have grave consequences for the Republic, as the poor soldiers became loyal to their generals rather than to the Roman state. While this seems like a landmark change, it is also possible that these reforms were just the final stage in an already occurring gradual decline in property requirements for the Roman army. The organization of the various Roman units was also completely changed in these reforms. The early maniple system was last recorded being used in the Battle of Muthul in the Jugurthine War of 109 BC. As the system had become obsolete and needed replacement, the Romans did away with it without sentimentality. By 104 BC, Marius had discarded 4 of the 5 legionary standards which had been used for command and control purposes: the Minotaur, Horse, Boar, and Wolf. Only one remained, the Aquila or Eagle. The Romans did away with it without sentiment had become obsolete, and by 104 BC, Marius had discarded 4 of the 5 legionary standards which had been used for command and control purposes: the Minotaur, Horse, Boar, and Wolf. Only one remained, the Aquila or Eagle. This is when the Roman Eagle standard became the emblem of the Roman legions. To replace the maniples as the primary tactical unit of the Roman military, the Cohort was adopted. Compared to the 120-strong maniple, a standard Republican cohort was a larger 600-strong unit, comprised of 6 centuries. 480 of these men were legionaries, whereas the other 120 were non-combatants, either servants, slaves, or tactical support personnel such as engineers. The component unit, the Roman century, was a 100-strong unit commanded by a centurion.
Engineers don't get their deserved props in history. I always try and give them a shout out.
Roman century was a 100-strong unit commanded by a centurion. In this unit, 80 men served as legionaries, military 20 men were non-combatants. There was also no designated military commander of a cohort itself, and it is widely believed that either the most senior centurion took command, or the 6 centurions commanded together as a council. The smallest and most personal unit in this system was the contubernium. This was comprised of 10 men commanded by an officer called a decanus. 8 men were legionaries and only 2 were non-combatants. 10 contubernia made up a century and 6 centuries made up a cohort. It was 10 of these new military divisions which made up a new Roman legion of around 6,000 men, with 4,800 legionaries and 1,200 non-combatants. The abolition of the manipular system also abolished the 3 distinct lines of infantry of the mid-republic. The Hastati, Principes and Triarii were removed, and instead 3 lines of infantry equipped similarly to the earlier Principes were adopted.
Interesting.
The form of triplex acies used in the Marian legion was different to the one implemented prior to it. Cohorts were a solid unit with only small gaps in between them, compared to the previous maniple system with larger gaps. This, along with the increased depth of the new cohorts, reduced the tendency of the soldiers to panic and flee, as they would feel they had more support and were safe. The legions were now on their way to becoming the force of popular imagination, a homogeneous force of heavy infantry armed with the gladius as their primary weapon and a dagger called the pugio as a sidearm. These new uniform warriors were all named legionarii. Their equipment mostly remained the same, but some tweaks were made. The iron shank of the pilum javelin was previously attached to the wooden shaft by 2 nails. However, Marius replaced one of the nails with a less sturdy wooden peg. On impact, the peg would snap, rendering the pilum useless and bending the shank at a right angle.
You guys are good. You guys are pretty good. I asked that a while back in one of the videos why they wouldn't pick them up, and you guys said how some of them would be designed to break on impact.
Snap, rendering the pilum useless and bending the shank at a right angle, making the enemy even more encumbered by the impaling of their shields.
They'd have to ditch the
As
shield.
for protection, the legionarii wore a helmet, body armor and greaves. Their main protection, however, was still the large scutum shield, which covered the soldier from shoulder to shin. A legionary would also bash and batter opponents with this shield, despite its weight. In this way, it could be just as offensive as his blade. The 1,200 non-combat attendants may seem like a lot of support personnel at first glance, but it is important to remember the key role of logistics in warfare. Without food, animals, fuel, and maintenance, an army could not function. The reforms did not ignore logistics, and the creation of Marius's mules was a perfect example of this. Under Marius, legionaries began to carry all of their equipment themselves, rather than relying on a cumbersome baggage train. This had many positive impacts for the operations of the army. The soldiers themselves became conditioned by their heavy load, with the physical training increasing their endurance during combat. In addition, the soldiers carrying their own entrenching equipment allowed for the rapid construction of fortifications, camps, and earthworks. Finally, the lack of a massive baggage train also allowed the legions to move extremely quickly compared to their prior speed. The only drawbacks were the complaints from the legionaries about their new heavy workload, becoming referred to as Marius's mules, named so for their heavy packs. As the Republic progressed, the unpopular nature of horsemanship in Roman society resulted in a severe deficit of cavalry. While the Romans were still fighting smaller foes on their peninsula, the smaller cavalry wing they possessed was adequate. However, as they began to come into contact with larger external foes with fearsome cavalry contingents such as the Germans or Gauls, it resulted in serious setbacks despite their lethal heavy infantry. After the Battle of Zama, Roman armies were almost always accompanied by a significant force of non-Italian cavalry. This became even more pronounced in the time of Marius, as he disbanded most of the Roman and Italian cavalry, replacing it entirely with native allied cavalry, who were often better trained and had specialized equipment from their homeland. In his later conquest of Gaul, Julius Caesar relied heavily on the famous Numidian cavalry, and later his Gallic and Germanic heavy cavalry for his victories in that war. Indeed, the final cavalry charge that gained victory at the Battle of Alesia in 52 BC was made by Caesar's German cavalry. Allied light infantry auxilia were also used in place of the earlier velites, which Marius disbanded. Various native peoples from around and outside the empire were used, including but not limited to German light infantry, Balearic slingers, Cretan archers, and light Spanish melee troops. Using his newly honed legions and tactics, Marius was successful, and the Cimbri were defeated once and for all at the battles of Aquae Sextiae and Vercellae in 102 and 101 BC. The reforms had their desired effect on the army, making it a standing professional.
It seems that, at least from the depictions in this video, that, and my question is, were the Romans at the Roman army the first time to sort of mass produce a lot of equipment like armor, shields, swords, etc.? Because it seems like a lot of the other troops I see, and maybe the depictions aren't meant to be completely accurate, are not very matching, and so I'd imagine a lot of them made their own gear and weapons, or at least they had a bunch of different people within their society making them. So were the Romans the first ones, at least in the West, to really have a very uniform looking army? Uniforms? You know what I mean? I hope you know what I mean.
Force which did not disband after campaigning, allowing it to retain its experience. In the coming centuries, this would set the stage for the development of the most...
Sorry, just because it looks like much more intimidating when everyone has like a matching or semi-matching gear. It just looks like they're much more professional and, yeah,
efficient
scary.
And deadly army of the ancient world. Despite the benefits, such massive changes would not go without consequence for the Republic. Because the general of a Roman army was responsible for the payment of their soldiers in both land and coin, the armies would often be more loyal to their general than to the Roman state. This was exacerbated as the majority of legionaries were now the poorer proletarii who desired payment and advancement. As a result, power began to shift from the senatorial class to the commanders in the field. From Marius to Sulla, Pompey, and finally to Caesar, this would cause a series of power struggles between various strongmen of Rome, which led to a series of civil wars. Eventually, the strain of these immense social changes would result in the rise of the imperial system under Augustus.
That's so cool. So, going away from the more rich people being supplied by by a group of citizens, or upper class, I guess, providing, there was much more control of these soldiers' mindset when it came to their loyalties. That changed when bringing in the poorer citizens who are more loyal to the generals, and that ultimately led to the Roman civil wars, or civil war with Caesar at least, and Pompey and stuff I learned before. That's very cool and interesting, and is a big point that I love to have just learned, honestly.
Sponsor of this video, Skillshare, is
I
the
want to make
premier
sure
online
any
2 months
code,
of Skillshare, the bell.
Right there.
Signing up to Skillshare via...
So if you're going to do this, guys, use this code, help out Kings and Generals right here. Boom. Awesome video. Going to do English history next. History matters. See you next time, guys.